My dogs are barking in the background just because they're really excited about you.
Everyone is. That's so common for me. That happens all the time.
Yeah.
Dogs bark, women swoon, monkeys throw feces. It's the perfect combination.
Yeah. I mean, it's out of control, really. I mean, it's got to be a hassle.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Pre-Accident Podcast. I'm your host, Todd Conklin, and thank you for being a part of this podcast. None of the others. I'm not thanking you for the other ones, the ones in the past or the ones in the future. I'm thanking you for this podcast. Oh, my goodness, are you in for a treat today? So this podcast has an interesting origin story. So I got an email the other day. I'm reading, actually what I'm doing is kind of clean an email. And I get a response that says, hey, if you're interested in talking to investigators, I can help you out. And I said, well, that sounds interesting. So I responded back, and I got this little comment that said, it's really interesting to think about how this new view safety stuff is moving. Then there's kind of an email pause, an ellipse. I think that's what you call those 3 periods. And then it says, I wonder if we're turning into kind of a new BBS. And I thought, stop right there. We'll stop right there. The new view is not behavioral-based safety. And I immediately responded and said, oh, yeah. So I don't know about the investigation stuff. I mean, that's good, and we'll talk about it. But I'm really interested in what you're thinking about this new view BBS comment you made. Let's put your money where your mouth is. Su dinero, su boca, juntos. Let's put them together. And pretty soon, Ron Gantt, that's who I was emailing with, hits me back and says, well, let's talk about it. So we sat down and just recorded a conversation. Like so many other great podcasts, it's just a conversation. But this conversation is really interesting because it starts running full speed and it doesn't really slow down. And I think you'll enjoy this a lot because what we're going to talk about specifically is this idea of how the new view is morphing and what's potentially happening. Listen carefully because I think you're going to enjoy it. Other than that, thanks for listening. This is Ron Gantt and Todd Conklin on a conversation on a Monday afternoon. Here we go. It's a heavy burden to bear, but I bear it for the bigger global safety issue. Okay, so you completely piqued my interest with this idea that new view of safety is moving into a fancy BBS. Tell me what you're thinking. I'm dying to know this.
Well, no. So it's definitely not all of it or everyone. It's just sometimes I get the sense that you hear these people applying these human performance tools and that's all great and everything, but they're kind of really just looking for another way to control the worker.
Oh, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. In fact, it concerns me greatly that the tools have become let me rephrase that. It concerns me that the tools have the potential to become sort of new view personified. Because people really want something to do. Like, give me, what can I do?
Yeah.
Tell me what I can do, because they're looking for sort of the one thing that will make everything better. And I think the tools are really super individually focused. Had the worker used more attention, the worker used STAR tool better, had the worker used, pick any tool you want to use, the accident wouldn't have happened. I completely agree with you. But to me, what's interesting about that is that it started to really highlight, at least on my little journey, this sort of overarching belief in prevention that you don't really need to respond if you can prevent.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's actually kind of an interesting thing. It reminds me of a discussion I was having with someone who was doing her dissertation on situational awareness.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah.
A dissertation on that? That's amazing.
Yeah, and it's actually a really fascinating thing. It's on the archaeology of the term.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, very interesting. But no,
do you mean, is it archaeology or is it like exegesic? Is it a linguistic study or a? A cultural
Basically,
study?
it's based upon Foucault, the philosopher.
Yeah.
The archaeology of meaning and language. I mean, it was really interesting when he was describing it.
Ooh, it sounds cool.
But he was pointing out that like situational awareness, when it first was born, was supposed to be this thing that kind of took the focus off of the individual and, kind of put the individual in context. And, it almost sounds like, wow, that's kind of new view. That's kind of interesting. But then over time, rather than this new concept sort of changing the way people saw the issues that workers were facing, it was sort of just assimilated into the overall culture of, well, this is another tool that we can use to focus on blame and reductionism and prevention like you talk about. Rather than something that helps us see the bigger picture, it's another thing that we can use to beat people up with.
I've always been really curious about that term because, like, barring astronauts and deep-sea divers, it would be hard, it seems to me, like to lose situational awareness. I mean, I guess pilots would fit into the astronaut deep-sea diver, where they no longer understand where they are. But most people, I think, don't lose situational awareness. It just becomes focused on other interesting stuff.
Exactly. To me, it's the kind of the version of it you see in occupational safety, where you don't see situational awareness enough. Is the idea that someone wasn't paying attention, or they were inattentive, and to me, it's the same concept because there's no such thing as not paying attention. You're always paying attention to something. Shouldn't the question be, not why wasn't this person paying attention? Shouldn't it be, what were they paying attention to? What was more interesting to them in that moment, and why?
Well, I would even take it further, just for the sake of argument, that I'm not sure attention is a choice.
Yeah.
I don't think you choose to or not choose to not pay attention. I think you discover yourself attending to something else when, in fact, the things you needed to attend to were being unattended. How'd that sound? Huh? Well, it's pretty impressive, that little sentence.
I know. And see, this is why this is a podcast.
That's why we need a whiteboard for this.
Oh, that would be amazing. See, there you go. You got my attention off on another tangent. But
something shiny. Look, here comes something shiny.
But no, I mean, and to me, I think that's almost an example of going back to the kind of what got us started. Is you see people it's like they start to get into the social science aspect of it and understanding people and how they think and the attention. But then they stop at a point where it's like, okay, well, we need to make these people pay attention more. And so they know, maybe they have better language in describing their blame, but it's really, at the end of the day, it's the same story, just with different words.
So there's a couple ways to look at this, right? We can sort of curse the darkness or light a candle. And It strikes me that we come back around to, and this is more candle lighting than dark cursing, it strikes me that we come back around to the fact that ultimately we're dealing with the belief that the worker somehow needs to be fixed. The worker's bad. The worker needs to be fixed. Or even more basic, that mistakes, read that as inattention or lack of situational awareness or zigging instead of zagging. Mistakes are somehow choices. And that if workers made better choices, then we would have less events. Right?
Yeah,
so everything takes us back there. What do we do with that?
No, and so to me, it comes back down to, it's a misunderstanding of human performance. It comes back to what you said about prevention, except I would say it's not just prevention response. It's the dichotomy for me is prevention facilitation. And so I want to help people perform better. I want to create safety in an organization. As a safety professional, that should be my job, not stopping not safety. That's right. Kind of a weird thing to say. And so, when I see a worker make a mistake, I mean, even that language itself lends itself to focus on the worker. To me, that's a system failure, because we had a system that was designed to create an outcome, to create performance, and that system failed in some way. And so, since we have the workers there, why aren't we creating a system that gives us the performance we want? We get this kind of reductionist mindset of, okay, if a worker doesn't follow the rule, it's either that, the rule was just bad or the person was bad. But I don't think it's that simple. I think there should be another question of, did the rule enable the person to perform better, to get better at their job, to increase their capacity to be successful? And I don't see that conversation happening very often. It's often, okay, how do we stop them from screwing up all the time?
Well, or stopping not safety.
Yeah.
That one actually really needs to be diagrammed. But I actually think that's a really interesting way to think about the pitfalls of both the old view, safety 1, and the new view, safety 2. And that is that it's very, very seductive to stop not safety. I wonder if we should better define that. To intervene into somebody not being safe, not following the rules, not following the procedure, not using the proper equipment, not using safeguards. The notion of intervening on that before the event happens is very, very seductive, right? And probably happens a lot, actually. I would guess that kind of intervention, workers are constantly detecting and correcting for themselves. So they're constantly finding stuff and fixing it. They're probably also constantly finding stuff and fixing stuff for the greater good, the system, the coworkers. So I imagine stopping not being safe happens a lot, but I'm not sure in and of itself that's sufficient enough to actually take us to a more reliable system, a system that has the capacity to perform pretty seamlessly.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think you're right, because one of the other mistakes people make when they get into that safety 1, safety 2 mindset is that it's either or. But it's not that way. It's kind of both and. We want to facilitate performance, and part of facilitating performance is preventing failure. That shouldn't be our whole point, our whole goal. I've been watching a lot of basketball recently because of the finals, and I'm in San Francisco, the Bay Area, and so I'm kind of really depressed today because the Warriors lost last night. But one of the things I've been thinking about as I've been watching it is part of being an expert basketball player, expert sports player, is preventing injury. But that's a very small portion of it. That's minor. And so the job of the coach, the job of the trainers is not to just teach them how to avoid injury, but teach them how to perform better, give them the tools they need to perform better, create the environment where performance can foster. Not force it down their throats, so to speak.
Well, let's pull the string on that sports metaphor a little bit more. They don't prevent injury by preventing injury. They actually prevent injury by creating capacity.
Yes.
So the way they keep workers or basketball players from being injured is training, exercise, conditioning, preparation, warm-ups, all those kind of things. And what that does is it, in fact, doesn't prevent the injury. What it does is create the capacity so the muscles can move, flex, and stretch as they're needed. What's the problem, Lassie? What's Lassie trying to tell us? Helicopter down?
That was a great point. That's what he said. I totally agrees with you.
Dog added for extra emphasis. Well, so I mean that's a completely different way to think about prevention.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden we could make a company and call it prevention through capacity, and maybe be like multi-hundredaires, or maybe 1,000-aire. We could become 1,000-aire. But yeah. I mean, isn't that what you're talking about?
Yeah, in a ways. I mean, and it reminds me of the conversation you had with Ivan on one of the recent podcasts about resilience and individual resilience. And that's really kind of what they're building in the individuals, and then they also build it at the team level. And then, you could also look at it organizationally and all that stuff. But that's kind of what it is. And so, I mean, I sort of wonder, are we creating that capacity in our workers to become experts, to become superstars at their jobs, or are we only holding them back?
Are they warming up? Are they stretching? Are they flexing? Are they conditioning? Are they eating right? And I think maybe the question is if we look at old view, the idea that you identify every hazard, mitigate the hazard, and then the worker's obedient and things will work perfectly, right? That's not a bad view, but it's pretty silent around the notion of creating, of conditioning, of creating capacity, of actually creating ways by having people be ready to actually reduce the frequency and the severity of the potential outcome. That's a really interesting idea. I just talked to this guy. His name's Adrian Cockcroft. That podcast is coming up here. It's like the next one, I think. And he's a really famous computer guy. Really famous, like super, super famous. It worked for everybody. And his big thing is around server capacity. And he called and said he wanted to be on the podcast. And the reason he wanted to be on the podcast is he wanted to talk about this idea of leading data that comes out of his field that we could apply in safety. And so I was like, yeah, let's go. Well, the interview's super interesting, partially because he was so well skilled on all our authors, our body of knowledge. He was also incredibly well skilled on the podcast, which was frightening but kind of interesting. But he talked about the shift that supercomputing has made. Not supercomputing, because that implies scientific computing, but large scale computing for like eBay, Netflix, Amazon, that kind of thing. And he said, we learned this from you guys, where once we would have bought the best server money could buy and then protected it with the best power supply and the best refrigerated floor and the best building and the best springs so that when earthquakes hit, we would actually try to build the perfect server. And he said, we don't do that anymore. Now what we do is we buy 1,000 crappy computers and put them together to perform the same function that the one supercomputer, read that as great computer, used to perform. And we know that those 1,000 crappy computers, gaming system computers, we know they'll fail. But when they fail, instead of failing 100% like the grand, unifying computer theory computer in the perfect server farm, that's 100% failure. When one of the 1,000 gaming system computers fails, we lose 1/1000th of our capability. Now think about that. And he said, that idea comes from you guys. But we'll think about that, because that's a huge flip in the way they think about their job, the way they think about sort of computational stability or computational resilience or computational reliability, right? New view for computers. In a way, I wonder what we can learn from that as it relates to the new view. I'm very curious about this, because I still think we talk a good game, but when we go out in the field, we really are trying to make the perfect procedure with the perfect prevention, with the perfect hazardous awareness program, with the perfect training in order to create the perfect outcome.
Yeah. No, it reminds me of a conversation I had recently with another colleague about rules and awareness and all those things. And, again, it comes back to the idea of, okay, if the rule fails, that's the rule's problem. If the person doesn't follow the rule, that's the person's problem. But we created a system where, in many cases, violation of the rule could cause an accident or could lead to an accident, whatever terminology we want to use. And we know that people don't follow rules all the time. And so how are our hands not dirty in that equation, where we put people in an environment where we know that control, that rule is not always going to work. And we know that if they don't follow the rule, they could get hurt. Are we not involved in that?
Sure. We're completely complicit, but I think that really begs this question, and that is, a rule is not a control.
Yeah.
So a rule, compliance to a rule is never a safeguard, right? So, and that's really hard for people. People get really emotional and have huge argument with me and tell me how stupid I am. It happens a lot, actually. But you have to tell them that a rule in and of itself is not robust enough to actually provide recovery.
Yeah.
So a rule is a prevention tool, but that's all it is. It's not a safeguard. It's not a barrier. It's not a control. A rule can never be a control because a rule itself is nothing. A rule is just it's just a piece of paper.
Yeah.
Now, that gets really difficult because they're like, well, you have to follow. So the example I'd use is fall protection. If rules were so robust, wouldn't we just make a rule that says don't fall?
Yeah.
Right? That would be enough because if they fell, they broke the rule. Well, everyone, of course, agrees that that's not robust enough. But then they want to tell me, but you have to wear the fall protection, that's the rule, in order to actually allow the fall protection to reduce the consequence of the failure. So therefore, a rule is a control. Well, no, it isn't. It's an administrative step, but it's not a control. It's just not. That's not what it is. And so that's a kind of a part of the interesting nuance that we talk about and deal with the entire time we talk about and deal with this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, I think you're dead. You're totally on. You're not dead. Take that out and like cut it and snip it. I think you're dead.
I certainly look that way.
Yeah.
And act that way. And according to everyone who I owe phone calls to, they're pretty certain you're right.
But I think you're so right, though. The idea is that we're trying to achieve an outcome, and I think we have to focus on that. That's what safety to this idea.
But let me push you on that. I mean, if I can, stay strong.
Go, please. Okay. Let me brace myself.
I think we can't look at safety as an outcome. I mean, say, the results of safety are outcomes. They're measurable and understandable, injured, not injured, but we know that. I actually think we have to look at safety more like conditioning, using your sports metaphor, because you're in this incredible basketball pain today, right? That really what safety is not an outcome to be managed. It's a capacity that we actually create within a system. So we build systems that are very resilient. So it's hard to make mistakes. It's hard for the system to fail. And when it does fail, it fails very elegantly, right? Yeah. Elevators in a tall building. You're in San Francisco. You know this. You probably can't use an elevator wrong and die. Or it'd be super unusual to use an elevator wrong and die, right? Well, that system really has the capacity to manage all kinds of people in all kinds of conditions doing a task, raising or lowering them on the floor. That's, I think, a challenge, is that we want safety to be this outcome. You are safe. But in fact, I'm not sure that's ever true. I think you have the capacity to fail safely, or you have the capacity to, the conditioning, right, to not get injured. I think that's a much better understanding of how safe, super reliable and safe systems stay super reliable and safe.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And so when I talk about outcome, what I mean is that the outcome of whatever the heck you're trying to achieve. And so for the elevator, it's getting to the ground floor. Safety is really a means to that, because I mean, I guess you could get to the ground floor unsafely, but I guess you're kind of done because you're dead then. But let's say getting up to the 15th floor is the outcome, and safety is one of the many ways that we need, that we are going to achieve that, or one of the means for achieving that. So safety is simply a capacity to achieve success. It's just a sustainable capacity to achieve success, so we can do it this time, and we can feel comfortable that it's going to continue to happen. Not that we are continually safe, but that safety is the means to that goal. And that's another piece to it, that, safety is about building that capacity, building that expertise, and that ability to be reliably successful.
So how do you sell that? Right back around to what we started. So what are the tools I need to do that? What's the silver bullet to make my company that way? And we're right back to where we started, right?
Yeah, it's true. And to me,
so I'll sell you an advanced BBS program that we're going to actually call RBBS, Resilient Behavioral-Based Safety, right? Well, that's not going to work, right? Actually, maybe. Probably someone will do it. Just wait.
Oh man, you just started $1 billion business, and you didn't even know it. But no, I think so. Step one is we have to change what we're looking for. Right now we're looking for those things that can lead to accident. I think we need to start looking for those things that build expertise in our organizations, that build the capacity. So what makes people successful? I mean, that's not a question we ask in safety, and that's an important change in mindset. A really good analogy that a friend and colleague of mine, Simon Albury, came up with is a top. You know, those little spinning tops.
Right.
The old way of seeing safety is, okay, our job is to make sure that top doesn't fall over. Whereas kind of safety 2 is like, no, our job is to keep that top spinning. And in both cases, you keep the top from falling over. It's just in the first case, there's, you know, one way you can keep the top from falling over is to build a structure around it to hold it up. Well, that stops it from spinning, so that's not good. So you're not achieving success in that situation at all. And so in the other case, though, if we can build an environment, conditions, you know, the friction of the table, you know, the way we spin it, et cetera, to keep that top spinning, we'll be able to achieve, you know, multiple goals together. And so we need to start seeing, okay, what are the things that will help people sustainably achieve whatever goal? So if their job is, you know, construction, okay, what's the way that you can stay up on that rooftop, putting that roof together without falling off? How can we create a condition where it's really easy for you to not fall off and really easy for you to make really cool roofs? And so we stop at how can we make it so you don't fall off? I think we need to get to the next part of, okay, how can we make it so that you can sustainably create roofs? We don't focus on expertise and safety. We're focused on how do we make people get up to a minimum level of, you know, not being stupid. But I think we need to get to the next level and tap into that innate. And people like to be smart, and they are smart. And if we tap into that, I think there's a lot of a really huge untapped resource we're not getting into. So, a situation that came up recently for me that really kind of opened my eyes a bit. I was talking with a utility, and this utility also covered some of the garbage pickup for the city. And I was talking with some of the collections workers, the guys literally driving the garbage trucks, picking up the stuff. And, you know, it's picking up garbage. And, you know, I mean, forgive me, but my initial impression coming in was, wow, this is probably a relatively brainless, easy job. But when you hear them describe it and how, like, okay, when you're coming down the road, you know, when you come down this particular street, and I don't remember what street it was, it narrows a certain point, so you got to slow down and make sure you're paying attention, while at the same time paying attention to where your big grapple arm that's coming out of your truck to grab the garbage is going, because, you know, you could easily hit a car in that situation. So, I mean, they're paying attention to multiple things. You know, another guy said there's this other part where these kids are often playing and they're really hidden and it's hard to see and they can just dart out right in front of you. So you really got to be paying attention to that while at the same time paying attention to all these other things. And so, I mean, it was just shocking to me how complex their job was. And I started to, you know, wonder, man, why aren't they having more accidents? And it's really because they've built their own expertise. And what I was witnessing wasn't them really talking to me. They were talking to each other. They were sharing, you know, amongst themselves, you know, hey, when I go on this route, here's something I noticed and that you should also pay attention to. So they were building a capacity within that group through lessons learned, you know, just stuff that they learned on their own, getting out there that no one could have predicted. No one, you know, that's not something that you could really just pull out of a training class without having gone through it. And so one of the other things I think we need to focus on, what builds capacity? Well, one of the things is lessons learned. Do we have strong, robust capacities to build those lessons learned? Many organizations, I find, we hide lessons learned. We don't want to talk about incidents. We're afraid of failure. But, you know, I think maybe that's something we need to bring out to the light and learn from, because that's something that gets people better. You know, going back to our sports analogy, one thing every sports organization does the day after the game, except for maybe the day after the finals game when they're at home drinking a lot, is they're watching tape. They're learning. They're getting better at what they do. And so I think that's another piece of it. We need to look for opportunities to learn a lot more than we currently do. And I don't just mean sitting down and training. I mean reflecting on performance and saying, hey, what makes this job difficult? What are the things that make this job challenging? And if we could find those and make them easier, I think we're going to achieve reliability, sustainability, resilience.
Just a couple of cats sitting around chatting on the podcast. That's all it was today. What'd you think? Isn't that interesting? This idea of expertise, capacity, we're really hunting and searching and creating words. We're creating language, the archaeology of language, may I coin Foucault's phrase, to get us into this new view. I think it's pretty interesting. It was a good podcast. It was really fun to do. Ron's great. Completely attainable. Give him a ring, give him a call if you want to talk to him. He's on everything, so he's easy to get a hold of. And I think he's pretty darn smart. And you are too now, because you got to listen to that conversation. I learned a ton. And you want a podcast that's got some dog action. Lassie coming in to tell me Timmy's fallen in the well, that kind of thing. Thanks for being a part of this. Thanks for listening. Tell your friends. Subscribe. Let's get some more people. It's always fun. The bigger we get, the better we are. Until then, learn something new every single day. Have as much fun as you possibly can. And for goodness sakes, be safe.